Hello, and welcome to Appen Media's Georgia Politics Podcast. I am Lindsay Coates, and today I'm happy to speak with newly elected Public Service Commissioner Peter Hubbard. He is running again for re-election this year because last year's was a special election to get the seats back into voting alignment after this case Rose versus Raffensperger. Once it resolved itself, they wanted to realign the seats so that the terms were back on for a regular year. So what I'm trying to say is that Peter had a 1 year term, and so he's running again for re-election for 6 years. And for those that don't know, that case was a challenge to how the PSC works because they are elected um, from a district, but they're voted on statewide. So just a little insight into how that works. But anyway, welcome, Peter. Thanks for sitting through that lengthy intro.
Of course, happy to be here, Lindsay.
Yeah, we're excited to see you again. So, one thing I would like to start with now is what's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's go with I like the Brontosaurus. I just like how large it is and how gentle it is.
Excellent. I like that. Okay. So, for the listener who's never heard of you, who you are, how does somebody give us a little bit about your origin story? Tell us how you got to where you're at in short form.
My wife and I moved to Atlanta in 2015, and shortly after we moved here, I began to pay attention to Georgia and how we put together our integrated resource plans. That's the plan for how Georgia procures its energy, where it comes from, and that's what my job had been as an industry consultant. I was looking at long-term power plans for utilities, and I decided to take a look here in Georgia, and from that, decided to create a nonprofit and pay attention down there at the Public Service Commission. And as you mentioned in your intro, there hasn't been an election there at the PSC, but I kept knocking on the door saying, I'd like to see more change. We can have clean energy. It will lower folks' power bills. And it was falling on deaf ears. And so when the opportunity came to run for office, I took that opportunity. I earned that 1 year term you mentioned, and now I'm back on the ballot this November for a full 6 year term. And I need that runway to really tackle some large issues like the next integrated resource plan in 2028, which again determines where our energy comes from and is also very important for answering questions about data centers. And right after that integrated resource plan in 2028 is the next rate case. And that's going to be the first chance for us to really recalibrate what folks pay on their power bills. So very important.
Awesome. Excellent. And thanks for that. And we'll get into the background of PSC and some other things too. So I appreciate you going ahead and touching on that. Let's go back to your campaign though, because it was fairly recently and that you're doing it again. What was the single promise that you were making to voters? Was there like one thing that you kept trying to get after or that you were hearing on the campaign trail?
Sure. Yeah. From the election last year in 2025 and the campaign, overwhelmingly, I would hear that folks are frustrated with the six rate increases on their bills, and they didn't understand why that was. So it was very much that question of affordability was overwhelmingly what I heard about. And a close second was data centers and whether or not they're paying their fair share. I'd also say that general accountability, commissioners, Republican commissioners taking money from companies that have business before the commission was also a sore spot. So there wasn't really just one issue. There were a number of things that were on voters' minds, but top of mind was affordability last year and this year too.
Yeah, I mean, it's across the board and so many various industries, like housing, those kinds of things. So yeah, it is something that's hitting a lot of people hard. And one of the things that really gets me is that it's like the conversations I'm hearing from other people are like, oh, it's just the media. It's making it. And I'm like, no, this is like my energy bill, electric bill through Georgia Power hit $800 plus last summer. It was wild. So it is definitely hitting people hard from an affordability standpoint. When so you when you were campaigning, and I had the opportunity and fortune of having you come to a group for and speak to us, but you mentioned that the Georgia Powers plans in particular are flawed, they're overpriced, um, and actually filed your own alternatives. What is a concrete example of one of those alternatives that you thought through that would be better?
Yeah, what I did as an expert witness intervener and a candidate last year in the integrated resource plan, I put forward four alternatives. I used a pretty sophisticated model, and I'm going to use it again this year to answer more questions on how we can bend the cost curve down. But what I tried to do is say that we don't have to compromise on affordability or and clean energy. We can actually embrace those low cost resources like solar and batteries. We can use them to meet this moment of load growth from data centers and actually use these things and keep our bills in check. And I'm going to be doing more of that analysis this year as well with that same tool. But my contention is that right now, Georgia Power Company is biased towards just building centralized power plants that can cost billions of dollars. And just before I joined the commission, the commissioners we had before us certificated a massive expansion of 10,000 megawatts of new power plants. That's enough to
Hmm.
power every single household in the state, and we're building it for data centers. And we're doing it with fossil fuel resources that are going to lock us into paying fuel costs for decades. They're going to lock us into future storm damage costs. We've just had a big case on that, and so just getting back to those lower cost resources like solar and batteries, when we deploy those at scale, we can lower folks' power bills. It won't happen overnight. It is going to take some time. But what I'm very keenly interested in doing is not locking ourselves and painting ourselves into a corner with fossil fuel resources that can become stranded assets. If we build a bunch of power plants and data centers don't show up, who's left holding the bill? Or
Right.
if we do build them and they show up, but they don't stick around to pay off those long-term mortgages we've just took out for those power plants, well, who's left holding the bag? And that there's real risks there. And as a regulator, I'm supposed to protect against those risks being shifted onto your back and my back.
Mhm.
And so, we really do have to be very mindful of what we're doing on the energy side. And we just,
And the environmental impact. Like,
yes, and no, we don't need to compromise on it as well. And I would just leave you with this: we in the nation, in the United States, last year and this year, and frankly across the world, more than 90% of what is being built is solar and wind and batteries. It's a very small fraction is fossil fuel power plants. And yet, the majority of what we're building in here in Georgia is fossil fuel power plants. There's a mismatch there,
mhm.
and that's what I'm interested in unlocking so that we can do what the rest of the world is doing, which is embrace clean energy.
And why do you think there is this mismatch?
Well, it really happens long before you build the power plants and the planning models that I'm looked at and focused on as an expert witness. I'll give you a very concrete example. Georgia Power is soliciting for resources that would be added to the grid in the years 2032 and 2033. And they've just now issued that request for proposals. But the way that it's designed, and I've tried to change this, but don't have the votes to change it, they're giving full capacity credit to a gas-fired power plant, but only 20% of the credit to a battery. And what that means is that a battery basically has to be 5 times more economic than a gas-fired power plant to be able to get
Mhm.
through this request for proposals. It's a problem, and I've flagged it and have pushed back on it, and yet it's setting us up for basically a round of procurement that would be yet another set of gas-fired resources. And I'm going to be it's going to be very hard for me to support something like that. And frankly, I'll
Yeah.
say I won't support something like that. So if that's what comes out of the wash in this request for proposals, which we'll know towards the end of this year, it's not something I'm going to be able to support. So, this is where we need to change how we're doing business and not setting ourselves up for failure. And that's a major concern of mine. And again, I've tried to change it, but I don't have
Right.
that third vote on the commission to really enact this kind of change I want to see.
Right, right. And hopefully you get that third vote this fall, but is there anything you can do right now, actually do with it being the way that it is? It's three Republicans and two Democrats.
Yeah, I can use the bully pulpit and continue to signal that there's a better path forward for
Yeah.
Georgia. And hopefully I can catch the ear of the electorate so that they put me there for another 6 years. And importantly, elect that third vote, Sheila Edwards, who
Hmm.
is my running mate now. And so there's some things I can do with just the bully pulpit. We do have two Democratic seats on the commission, and so in the recent storm damage cost recovery docket and fuel cost recovery docket, I put forward four motions that would three of them would have just lowered the amount that's collected by the power company and
Hmm.
lowered what would be on your bill. And a fourth motion was to investigate further how the company is collecting on fuel costs and whether there are some hidden costs being shifted from data centers. All four of those motions failed, but we had to take a vote on it, and all the commissioners had to take a position. And so
Hmm.
it's a signal to everyone that here's what we can do once we have the votes. So it's a little limited on what I can do right now, but I also, as a third thing, and I'm doing this now, laying the groundwork for these big dockets that are so important and critical to the state. That work is begins long before those dockets are filed. So, preparing now with the modeling and analysis that will be able to support what it takes place in 2028 with that long-term power plan the company will file. It's important for me to be preparing for that. So that's three things that I can do,
Yeah.
but I'm limited and need that third vote.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, bully pulpit, continuing to educate and let people know. I mean, more people voted in that PSC election last year than ever before. I'm sure many of them had no idea what the PSC was previously, and just that their energy bills are high and it was resonating. So, yeah, you just do what you can while you're there, and hopefully we can make some change this fall. So we kind of jumped in, and I think you gave us a brief kind of like what you've done already, but explain it to me like I'm five. What exactly does the Public Service Commission cover? And what exactly do they cover?
Sure. The Public Service Commission, it is now 146 years old, and it was created to originally oversee the original monopoly of railroads.
Okay.
But now, principally, what the Public Service Commission does is it regulates how much you pay on your power bill and where that energy comes from. And it's directly overseeing Georgia Power Company and Atlanta Gas Light, so power and gas. It indirectly regulates things like electric membership corporations if you happen to pay to your city or to an EMC your electricity bill. So we regulate how much you pay on your bill and where that energy comes from, whether it's coal-fired power plants or solar or gas or it's bought from other markets. So it boils down to that, how much you pay on your bill and where the energy comes from.
Hmm.
And we also oversee, like I said, electricity, gas, and telecoms, just landlines, not broadband or internet or your cell phone. But we don't regulate those things or water. So most of your utilities, the big expensive ones, like electric and gas, that's primarily what we do.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And we've talked about Georgia Power a couple of times now, and they are a private company. But you mentioned the word monopoly and replacing the railroad monopoly. And Georgia Power is a monopoly for, I mean, they are. And how does the PSC come in? And like the regulated, we've got this, they say they're not a monopoly because there's other options in the, anyway, can you get into that piece of it for us? Like,
Sure. Sure. Yeah, so just a tiny bit of background that the regulatory construct we have is that we grant that license to operate as a monopoly because it doesn't make sense to build duplicate wires and have two sets of wires and poles running down every neighborhood. So that's part of why they're granted that monopoly. But the flip side of it is that you have a commission that oversees what they do and makes sure there isn't clearly imprudent or even illegal spending. And that hasn't always happened with the commission that we've had over the last quarter century. When I joined the commission, it was the first time Democrats have been on it in decades.
Hmm.
And so Georgia Power does have that monopoly. There are exceptions when a large customer, basically a Kroger, a Publix, or a larger kind of commercial customer comes to the state, they may have the option to choose their provider. There are also nonprofit electric membership corporations, and that's where there's a bit of competition between Georgia Power and those EMCs for larger customers. But you and I, as residential
Yeah.
customers, we don't have a choice. Wherever our house happens to be, then the map that was carved out in the 1973 Georgia Territorial Service Act, that's where you have to pay your bill to. So we don't have that option to, as residential customers, to choose a different provider. And we'd also don't have a say in how much, if we want to choose ourselves as a provider and put solar on our rooftop and batteries in our garage, it's very difficult to make that investment pay off if you're not really getting the real value from it. And that's something that Georgia Power sets and the commission oversees. And I'm interested in right sizing, but again, I don't have the votes yet for it. So
Right.
that's where there is some competition if you're a larger customer, but if you're a residential customer, you just got to pay your bill.
Whatever they say.
And where that is troublesome is in places like Cobb County, where you might have on one side of the street a neighbor paying Georgia Power Company bill, on the other side of the street, Cobb EMC, which is literally half of the bill for the same amount of energy. And that doesn't sit well with customers. The difference is one is for profit and one is not profit.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. Our neighborhood, we are Georgia Power, but our neighborhood backs, we're in Fulton County, and it backs up to the Cobb border. So it's literally on the other side of my neighborhood, or in the back of it. That neighborhood is vastly, wildly cheaper. What fraction of it. It's just crazy. Okay, so let's get into the hot topic of the day, which everybody is clamoring about, and it's data centers. And we're going to talk about them from a couple different perspectives because there's also something happening here locally in Roswell too. So it's top of mind. So Georgia Power says it needs about 10,000 megawatts of new capacity, power for roughly 4 million homes, I guess. That's roughly 80% of that is going to data centers. Okay, so let's get into the topic of the day, which hot topic of the day, which is AI data centers and data centers in general. And I think what I'm seeing here in Roswell, because we're now going back, the mayor and council is going back to they called a moratorium on data centers because we did not have them defined in our Unified Development Code, our UDC, that is zoning for those who are not aware that cities, municipalities have their zoning codes. And so now, as of yesterday, they were going to start redefining them and make them on an approval based process only moving forward. So potentially allowed in certain areas with council approval. A lot of people got up in arms, a lot of moms, just seeing the word data center. And I think a lot of people don't understand that businesses, city governments, they all need data center storage, but there's a difference between. Can you talk to us about the difference of what these AI data centers are versus what many municipalities have already there?
Sure. Yeah, we've had data centers for a few decades now, and think about your Gmail account or um, a lot of times there's enterprise software cloud computing where a company just needs to handle invoicing and things like that. That's what some data centers do. Then there's also the kind of data centers that help with scaling up, hyperscalers, large operations like Netflix streaming, or increasingly we see around Atlanta these Waymos, these self-driving autonomous vehicles. That's something that a data center would be a part of. Or you can go all the way up to what has happened since November of 2022 when ChatGPT was released. Now you have data centers being used to train large language models. And there's an enormous amount of money being thrown at that problem. And you're just seeing data centers blossom like mushrooms because everyone is trying to be the first to have that killer product. And so data
Mhm.
centers kind of cover a whole range of things. And frankly, our use of cell phones is one of the reasons why data centers are growing as well. But my concern about data centers is manyfold. Just as a public service commissioner, we really only oversee the power side, how much they're paying on their in contributing to the grid, whether or not they're causing us to have to expand the grid. You mentioned the 10,000 megawatts that Georgia Power now has certificated to meet data center load growth. But there's a whole bunch of concerns with data centers, water, land use. I believe this year there's going to be 3.5 billion in tax abatements that we're not going to collect as a state when these data center companies absolutely can pay those bills. So we really need, in my opinion, a whole of government effort. Even if I only oversee the power side of it, there's a whole range of issues, and people are rightly concerned about them because they, frankly, often only learn about them once they're under construction. They're
Mhm.
operating under a veil of secrecy behind a non-disclosure agreement, and people just don't feel like they have an input because they don't, in many
Right.
cases, and that's why you see moratoria popping up, and that's just moving fast and breaking things. But that's not necessarily the right business model for people in Georgia. So that's why you're seeing so much concern. And frankly, I haven't been convinced myself that there isn't cost shifting, despite everything we hear from the powers that be that they are paying their fair share. I still don't believe that to be
Yeah.
true.
Show us the proof, please, first. Yeah, so you mentioned that the 10,000 megawatt expansion, and it was an all Republican commission that approved it, 5-0, right before you got there. And so, what's your honest read? Like, I'm trying to understand why, and other than just straight corruption that this is happening, or like are they truly just in these commissioners' pockets? Like how are we so far removed from what is happening on the street and the pushback and all that stuff?
That is a excellent question, and I really can't speak to the motives of the Republicans that do this, but they continue to accept money from companies that have business in front of the commission, and I find that
Yeah.
deeply unethical. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that there's corruption is a big word,
Yeah.
and that may be the case on the
Right.
Republican side. I don't mind casting that aspersion. But the power company itself is just doing what they're meant to do, which is maximize shareholder profit. And I
Mhm.
understand that's what their angle is. My
Mhm.
job is to be a shield against imprudent spending. And it's just helpful to understand the business model of Georgia Power. When they build expensive new power plants, they can put that into the big pool of money called the rate base, and that's what rates are based on. That's how much your power bill is based on, is whether or not they're covering the costs of all the assets in their rate base. So they very much are incentivized to just build brand new power plants to meet data center load growth. What I believe we should be doing more of is using the investments in the power grid that we already have more efficiently and extracting more out of what we've already paid for. And when you do that, and when data centers are actually paying as if they're full freight, as if we're building new power plants, but not building new power plants, then they can be used, their revenues can be used to lower our power bills. And that's what I'm interested in seeing is let's not only reflexively react to data centers by just building new things. Let's use what we already have more efficiently. And if we're going to deploy new resources, let's make sure they're the lowest cost resources like solar and batteries and those things that don't keep us on that merry-go-round, that Netflix subscription model, I call it, where you have to keep purchasing fuel over and over and over again. Let's do more solar where the fuel is free and the pipeline to transport that sun is free right to that solar power plant.
Mhm.
That's what we should be doing more of. When we go down the path of building brand new power plants, especially fossil fuel power plants, we are locking ourselves into a future of having to purchase fuel and deal with the consequences of emitting carbon dioxide and all those things that we should be avoiding. So we just need to be more thoughtful about it. And I am trying to do that at the commission, but need commissioners who can see that pathway and actually do the right thing and vote for what's in the interest of Georgians and not the power company.
Yeah, I just looked this up because shame on me for not thinking about it before, but I I started looking up Georgia Power's profits from last year. And yes, they are supposed to drive, but is this, and this is AI, so 2.5 billion in 2024, a 22% increase. Like how, yeah, the commission previously does not seem to have any interest in holding them accountable to us or rate increases and or any of this. It just feels um, very corporate greed as opposed to looking out for that versus looking out for the citizens and the people that are reliant on those systems. Um, so let, the man that you beat, he raised something like 87% of his money from people and firms that are tied to these companies that he's regulating. And you just mentioned that they're still taking money from projects and people, corporations that are coming in front of the commission with business. Um, from a personal perspective, from the way that you're going to run things, are you taking any of those dollars? Are you committed to not taking any of them? How does that look for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I signed a pledge earlier this year to not take fossil fuel money. So that's first and foremost something that I just won't do. And certainly the lawyers that represent Georgia Power, I certainly won't take money from them. Where I am, and that all of this just means I have to work that much harder to garner the support I need to earn a full 6-year term. But I'm willing to do that. It's one of the many barriers that the system we have in Georgia throws in front of candidates like me, but I
Mhm.
take that as a challenge and it makes me work harder. And frankly, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but the special session
Okay.
coming up on June 17th is another barrier. They're going to redraw the Public Service Commission maps, not for this election this year, but in 2028, we'll have different PSC map. And that may make it challenging for the next two seats and finding candidates to run there. So there's always these barriers that they love to throw in front of
Hmm.
good candidates because I just don't want to have that accountability. So I am not going to take money from fossil fuel. I'm not going to take money from any companies that have interest in front of the Georgia Power Company, Georgia Public Service Commission. And I think that there's plenty of folks that are interested at the grassroots um, in supporting a campaign that is trying to do right by the people of Georgia. So that's where I'm focusing my efforts. It does make it harder for me, but that's what I signed up for.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Uh, we're going to kind of start to close this out here because this has been a great informative conversation, but I know a lot of it can be heavy for for people too sometimes. So if a listener forgets everything else that we talked about today, what's the one thing that you would like them to remember or take away from this?
What I think you should take away from this conversation is that there's been a lack of accountability on the commission to make sure that the power company is really only spending money that needs to be spent and not anymore, and not collecting on it. And we haven't had that accountability in a long time, but we're starting to have it now with two Democrats on the commission. And we have the chance to get a third Democrat on the commission this fall. That's the majority. And no matter how the maps are redrawn, we keep that majority for the next 4 years. And so it is critical for folks to pay attention to the Public Service Commission if you're concerned about high power bills and you're concerned about climate change and leaving a habitable planet for our children. The Public Service Commission is probably the least known but most critical
Mhm.
agency in the state of Georgia, in my opinion. And so I want people to just come away knowing that there are good people out there trying to do the right thing, but we need your help to get those people on the commission to continue to fight for you. And that's what I'm interested in doing. But I need everyone's help who's listening to this message to know that they have to come out, vote all the way down the ballot, and just make sure that their neighbors are voting too, because their power bills are on the line, and we have
Mhm.
the chance to do something about it after many, many years of just rubber stamping whatever the power pump company puts in front of the commission. And that I just can't accept that. That's not the way that I do business. And I'm going to look critically at every ask, every dollar that they ask us to authorize. And so that's the takeaway is that
Okay.
you are empowered to take control of your power bill by voting, and I want to be that vehicle for you exercising your power as the people.
And from now until November, I mean, we do have primary runoff coming up. Early voting starts this Saturday. Well, this will come out afterwards, but um, the election is on the 16th this month. But for those outside of voting, where else can people weigh in to show up, comment, push back on these bigger items that are coming up? What should they do?
Really, I think it is helpful to continue to lobby your own legislators and let them know that you're interested in holding Georgia Power Company accountable and you're interested in clean energy. Obviously, if folks can support the campaign, peterforgeorgia.com is a great place to do that. In fact, June 11th is when I will be organizing the first of many volunteer calls to help with folks that want to get in touch, help with canvassing and door knocking and phone banking. So peterforgeorgia.com is the website where you can sign up for that and just continue to make your voice heard. People are deeply concerned about data centers, and I think forcing your leaders to pay attention is great. And that's what democracy is all about. So just stay active. Don't let your rights be taken away by not voting. You have to get out and vote. It's probably the most important thing you can do.
Especially in these times, you got to speak up for yourself because nobody else is going to do it. They're all looking at us. So go and make your voice heard. The biggest thing. I completely agree. So, last one. You get elected this fall. You have a 6-year term. What do you want your legacy to be? What's like the one big thing? Is there one big thing you want to accomplish? How do you think about that?
Oh, there's plenty that because of the neglect of, in my opinion, the commissioners who've rubber stamped everything. There's a lot of work to be done. But
Yeah.
what you will see when I'm reelected and we have that third seat is real reform starting to take place. The big docket, the fuel cost recovery docket, it came out in the wash that there are some costs, like pipeline transportation costs, that are not being borne by data centers. And I tried to change that, and there is some investigation into this, but we'll actually be able to take action on that beginning in January of next year. We'll be taking a look at the profitability of the company and how much executive compensation is taking place. That
Mm-hmm.
2.5 billion you mentioned, in my opinion, is pretty rich for this state. So those are the things that we can actually do when we have the votes is right sizing what has been taken advantage of, frankly, by the commission and the company that we've had so far.
Talk to me, and I know I said that was the last one, but the very first thing that you mentioned is like the pipes and transportation and that cost not being borne by the power plant or the power company. What do you mean? Like, are they also paying what they should for water consumption and things like that? Like, just I know we're wrapping up, but I'm really curious about that part. Like, are they?
The water part I can't speak to because that's not something we oversee at the PSC, so I don't know how much they're paying on water. I do know
Oh,
that they're taking millions of gallons out of local aquifers, and that's a real challenge for local municipalities. But what I mean on the power side is in this fuel cost recovery docket, there are data centers kind of pay a real-time price, but those pipeline firm transportation pipeline costs, those are not in that pricing mechanism that data centers pay. And when you query the power company about this, they say that's true, but they're more than making up for it on the other side of the equation, which we'll show you and give you the receipts on in the next rate case in 2028. You'll recall that last year in 2025, there was a rate freeze, and we never got the chance to look at these data centers and what they're paying and determine if it's truly they're paying their fair share or not. We just have to trust the power company until the next rate case. And
interesting.
so I mean that's where my concern is. And I mentioned earlier in this conversation about stranded assets and we build power plants and the data centers don't show up or they don't stick around to pay off the bills. There's myriad ways that costs can be shifted. And just the very fact that we're building power plants that will demand will more natural gas for fuel, that's gonna when you have increased demand without increasing the supply, prices go up. And we saw that in this docket that the price that we pay for fuel in the state for electricity generation is going to go up 5 to 11% over the next few years. So there are lots of ways that they are increasing costs on us. And I'm, again, not yet convinced that they're fully covering 100% of their costs.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we need a full rate case for that. We need someone who is a consumer advocate who's really looking at this critically to make sure that costs aren't being shifted. That's why we need to have Democrats on the PSC.
Right. Somebody that's looking out for that affordability aspect. Well, Peter, thank you so much. This was educational for me as well today, even having paid attention last go around. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to Appen Media and for the Georgia Politics podcast. And again, thank you to everyone. There is early voting happening now, so get out and go vote for your runoff elections. There's some serious statewide races on there, so make sure to get out, go vote for those, and then vote in the fall. And I appreciate it. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Lindsay.